Hello, folks, and welcome to our 2018 Animal Science and Forages webinar series. This is our November meeting, and this is provided by our ACES Animal Science and Forage team. My name is Kent Stanford. I serve as Extension Specialist in Nutrient Management. I'm here today to talk about Hurricane Michael recovery for livestock producers, and specifically we will be talking about watering and fencing issues. We know the damage from Hurricane Michael has been very extensive in the southeast part of our state. Our extension efforts have documented over 200 million in losses to date, with about 24.5 million specifically related to livestock. In the immediate aftermath of a hurricane or any storm, we really have to pay attention to the actual livestock themselves, and they kind of fall into three categories for me. I think the dead, injured, and displaced are the three different ways we can describe them. As far as those that are deceased, we want to pay attention to the number. We have to pay attention to carcass disposal, and then document those losses for any potential assistance that we might get through FSA. Those that are injured, we have to determine the severity of those injuries, what are our treatment options. For those with significant injuries that require euthanasia, how are we going to handle that? And then carcass disposal becomes an issue as well. And then finally, I guess the category that we will talk about the most over the course of this webinar today is those that are displaced. First, we got to locate them. How far have they drifted? We've got to get a good count. Hopefully we know how many we may have had within each group to start with, and then try to get those cattle settled down in some manner. As they experience the storms like we do, and they go through that stressful time, those cattle will naturally start to drift in a storm. They can scatter out quite a ways, and so being able to locate those to get them settled and then to be able to move them back to a piece of property where they can spend some time and get back to somewhat of a normal routine will help that situation out. Let's talk just a bit about water quality. The water quality and safety issues certainly are a concern in the aftermath of a hurricane of this magnitude. Is our water supply safe to drink? If it's not safe, what happens then? Is it a dependable source of water? And then how long will it be dependable? Are we going to be able to depend on it for the foreseeable future? Or does it only give us a few days before we have to move somewhere else? As a reminder, as far as water needs in gallons per day for different classes of livestock, we see on the chart here that a 400-pound feeder calf with 50-degree weather may only drink 4 gallons of water per head per day. But as we move down the chart and we see lactating cows and mature bulls that might be experiencing 90-degree weather, they could be over 20 gallons of water per day. Just a few facts for you here on cattle watering. They can drink 1 to 2 gallons per minute as they come up to the trough to drink. They might drink for 2 to 3 minutes for that particular drinking event. And so they can drink 6 gallons per drinking event per animal throughout the course of the day. So we just have to understand that when we're talking about the size of the troughs, the storage volume that we might have available. Let's talk a bit about water sources. For many producers, the farm well is the primary water source. In the aftermath of a storm, have to determine, is it still operable? If it's not operable, how much repair is going to be required to get it operating again? Do we have those materials on hand, the supplies on hand that it will take to repair that? If we get it repaired and the power is off, how are we going to run it at that point? Are we going to be able to use a generator to run that well? Is solar an option for us at all? If we are not dependent on the farm well, what about surface water? Do we have access to any ponds, creeks, streams, so that we can utilize those for watering our livestock? Do we have true access to it? Is it on our place or is it on a neighbor's place? Is it down the road a ways? Have to think about that and how we will provide access to those animals. Maybe we were on a municipal water supply. Is it still available? Is it going to be dependable? Is there damage to the municipal water system and they're going to be down for a few days before we can depend on that again? We have to think about that. Plus, if we want to be able to get tapped into municipal in the aftermath of a storm, it's very unlikely that they are going to want to come out and get you a tap put in with a meter. So just have to think about that as well. So we start to develop a water plan. We have to ask many questions when we do that. Is our current water system on the farm operable after this storm? Do we have damage to the water lines themselves and our troughs? How much are we going to have to do as far as repairs there? Can we cap off some lines that maybe have damage and be able to have water go into some portion of our system? Will we need to run some temporary lines or troughs to get us through the days immediately after the storm? What materials do we have on hand to be able to do that? If we don't have troughs, where can we find those? How far will we have to drive? Can we depend on somebody to help us with something that we can utilize as a trough to water those animals? Where can we put those short-term versus long-term? In the short term, we may have to put cattle in a smaller area where we can secure them. But over the long term, if we're able to shift those cattle back out onto some pasture, where can we put those troughs at that point? We want to make sure that when we do, we install them properly so we don't get any damage from the cattle themselves. Realize that as these cattle come up to drink water, if it's cool, clean water, they will like it. They would prefer to drink that versus stale, nasty water that has been around for a long time. So good quality water, they're going to drink more of it. They're going to be thirsty, and when they get thirsty, they can be somewhat destructive. I took this picture a couple of years back in the drought we experienced in northeast Alabama in 2016. This producer had gone to great lengths to haul water. He's got a large tank here on the back of a big truck. He was filling up this, taking out to the pasture, and using this, and his idea was that he could leave this and that the float valve would take care of things. The problem is, as you can see, what he ran into was right here in the center of the photo, you can see that his garden hose that he has feeding the trough is not protected in any shape, form, or fashion. So when the cattle come up, they can easily tear that loose, and all the water will run out on the ground instead of being available in the trough. Part of our water plan then might involve hauling water. What size container are we going to use for that? Do we have access to a nurse tank with a pump so that we can actually go around and pump the water versus leaving a tank and letting it gravity feed? Maybe we've got a neighbor with a large nurse tank that they've used to spray their crops with that has not had any chemicals in that nurse tank. Maybe 1,000-gallon tank with a gasoline pump on it. That would be really ideal if you could utilize that to transfer water out to these cows. And again, thirsty cows are hard to fill up. If you've ever done that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Very, very challenging to be able to get them filled up when they are very, very thirsty. So we have to think about the daily needs. In the example I'll use here, we have a 30-head spring calving herd of cows with one bull, averaging about 10 gallons per head. So for this group, then we need about 310 gallons total per day. Other options that might play into the situation would be irrigation wells. We're late in the growing season at this point. All the irrigation should be over with, and so there may be an irrigation well close by that could be utilized, particularly if it's got a gas or diesel powered pump on that. Recreational fish ponds, maybe on your property or on adjoining properties, might be an option. Solar pumps might be worth an investment for you to be able to get cattle further away from maybe your headquarters, get them out on the grass so that you're not having to feed, and you might be in an area where you have some water but you don't have any electricity. So solar pumps might be an option also. Lay flat irrigation hose can be bought as well. If you were in a low flow situation and you needed to utilize some of this to help pipe out, that would work. Even if you're in a high pressure situation where you're utilizing a larger pump, then you would be able to utilize something like this irrigation hose. You frequently see this in fruit and vegetable production. And then finally, you might consider the use of electric fence lanes to provide access to water and keep the cattle still confined. In this picture here, you see these cattle come down to a watering ramp that's on this body of surface water. They've used some type of electrified fence here. They've stabilized the bank through heavy use area protection. The cattle will come down, they'll water, and then they'll turn around and leave. There's no shade in this area that would mean the cattle will continue to loaf and stay in the water. So they'll come down and drink, and then they'll move on. Other considerations, back to the solar side of things, there's obviously some initial costs there. Most of your solar systems are going to be low flow, so we have to think about the amount of water demand we could have at any one time, and typically then you would have some amount of supplemental storage there. In a traditional system, maybe where we've got a well, but we don't have any power, then we're looking at using a generator. These are high flow, high pressurized systems. But if we don't have power and we're having to run things over the course of a day with a generator, maybe we need to look at some supplemental storage. Along those lines, supplemental storage is basically going to be an above ground tank. It's positioned high enough that hopefully you can use gravity for your flow, and maybe you've got a tank big enough that it gives you a multi-day supply. This scene is all too common in the aftermath of storms, whether it be hurricanes or tornadoes that we might experience. Obviously, a large tree that is down here, a farm tractor and a farm-sized chainsaw can deal with this, but it will take time to do that. So we have to understand the magnitude of the work to be done. And so if we are focused on trying to do cleanup of something like this, we can't forget about the water needs of those livestock. In addition to that large tree, we've got situations where you just have lots of trees and limbs and debris that is on the fence line itself. So again, this is not a quick recovery here. This takes time. If you've got very much fence at all, to clean this off and be able to get that fence back up so it's doing its job. Here's a photo that looks like not too much fence damage, but as this tree blew over, the root ball comes up, lifts that fence up. You can probably work there for a bit, be able to get that fence back down and let it continue to do its job, but you do have that root ball and a large tree then to contend with. So from a longer term standpoint, we have to realize that we've got situations like this everywhere. On the cleanup and repair side of things, the Farm Service Agency has their emergency conservation program, and really there are two different components of this program that would be applicable for producers to utilize. First is the debris removal from farmland, so this is actually the debris that you'll be cleaning up. And then the second part of it is the restoration of fences. This can include cross fences as well as boundary fences and gates. You need to contact your local FSA office for more information on how you might qualify and what information they will need. Well, let's move on and talk about fencing. Two parts of the fencing side of things that always kind of rise to the forefront for me. First is damage assessment, and then what is our action plan going to be? We can break that down and say we've got immediate needs and then the long-term recovery and rebuilding process. As far as immediate needs, I think temporary electric fence is a real solid option for folks. It's very fast, very economical, flexible, which is what you need in that situation. There's a variety of materials that are available. The polywire and polytape are very, very easy to utilize. And the great thing about it is you don't have to have straight lines. It can zigzag wherever it needs to go around whatever obstacles might be in the way. We don't have to worry about major brace posts. You can actually utilize a T-post brace. Most farm supply stores, places like Tractor Supply, as well as co-ops, might carry the brackets that you utilize with T-post to build a brace, a simple brace. They're quick and effective, and you can pull quite a long ways with those style braces. And then you can be creative from there. I've seen producers use old water hose, water pipe, even plastic hay twine as insulators to be able to get that wire, that poly wire, where you need it. So be creative. There's no right or wrong way to do it. As far as electric fence chargers go, the energizers, it's important to use the right size charger. Power output on those is measured in joules, and typically it will say on there will run a certain number of miles of fence. There are differences in stored energy release between different brands of chargers, and so you need to understand that. Some may release 60 or 65% of the stored energy, and others may release 80 or 85%. So just be aware of those differences between the different brands. Grounding is crucial. You've got to have these grounded correctly. To do that, you use one ground rod plus one for every 4 joules of power. So you'll have a minimum of 2 ground rods spaced 10 foot apart in moist soil. Typically, we would say east of the Mississippi River, we don't have to worry about getting a good ground. And so you should be able to do that with no problem. We've got plug-in style and then battery and solar chargers as well. Need to think just a bit about the type of wire that you might be using and the resistance of that particular wire. We measure resistance in ohms per mile. Our standard 12.5 gauge high tensile wire that comes in a 4,000 foot roll cost about $100 per roll. It's found in most farm supply stores. From there, we work our way up through the various gauges of wire. We move into smaller wire through 14 and 16 gauge. We get into the braided rope, polywire, polytape products that are out there. And then as we get all the way up to stainless steel products, the resistance may be very high there. And so we may be contrasting that with 4,000 ohms per mile versus only 60 ohms per mile on the 12.5 gauge wire. Resistance is affected by the length of the fence, the type of the wire that is being used, and whether or not you're using parallel jumpers. Parallel jumpers are basically the jumper wires that you put between the wires, and you would put that at each end of each run of wire. The most common electric fence problems are on this particular slide. Most of the time as I work with producers with issues, there's a grounding issue. A poor ground can create issues for you. Sometimes they don't have any surge protection put in on the power side for those plug-in style chargers. Many times a charger will be located at a barn that is at the end of an electric line, a power line, and so we get surges there, and so surge protection is important to include. There may not be any lightning protection on the fence side. If you get a direct hit with lightning on the fence side, that lightning is trying to get in the ground, so it's running that fence back. If you have done a good job of grounding your charger, that's where the lightning is headed. It's trying to get to that good ground, and you want to protect your charger, so you want to head it off before it gets there through the use of a lightning arrestor or a similar device. Cutoff switches can be a good thing to have on the fence so that you can turn off various sections that you may be working on without having to go back to the charger, or you can invest in some of the new technology that we have in chargers nowadays, where you have a control unit, a remote control unit that you can control the charger from out on the fence itself. Overgrown fence lines can drain power off the fence, so you want to make sure that you maintain and manage those. You may have invested in a high resistance wire that is slowing down your charge, and you're not able to get the flow that you need onto the wire. A grounded fence can also be a drain. I typically see this with folks using T-post and pop-on plastic insulators. The wire comes out of the insulator pops off. Maybe if a deer runs through the fence, wire gets against the T-post and you're grounding your fence out. You can get shorts that develop in fences, and then also undersized chargers can be an issue as well. Maybe the charger was right sized when you started your system, but you've added to it and now it just doesn't have enough power to get the flow that you need on the system. There's some good resources out there for you. I just included a couple here today. The first is the Emergency Conservation Program fact sheet through FSA. The first link will take you to that. And then the second link is to our Alabama Extension Michael Recovery page. I encourage you to go there and check out all the resources that are available. Again, my name is Kent Stanford. My telephone number and email address are listed here for you. You're welcome to call or email. If you have any follow-up questions, you can check out an archive of this program on alabamabeefsystems.com. And as a reminder, this webinar series is provided to you by our ACES Animal Science and Forage team over the course of the year. We would invite you to join us in 2019. You can visit our website again at www.alabamabeefsystems.com to sign up for our monthly newsletter and see other updates as we approach 2019 and continue our Animal Science and Forages webinar series. Thanks for your attention and have a great day.